With that, we are prepared to launch our panel discussion. We have an excellent participation here from some of the people that you've already heard from and some additional thought leaders on technological innovation, as well as on community engagement or community-centered innovation. This panel is called Exploring and Incorporating Emerging Technologies for Social Impact. And we will give a space for each panelist to deliver a presentation or talking points. Please feel free to present your PowerPoint or whatever other audiovisual tool you have directly, or to just communicate openly if you so prefer. Each one of you will have between 10 to 15 minutes, and I welcome you to engage with each other, to respond to relevant perspectives that you hear, and I may be interjecting at different points during the panel to ask some of the questions or make some of the comments from the audience. What we would suggest for the order of interventions would be to continue with Lance, if that's all right with you, just to have that sort of macro level view on partnerships, and continue afterwards with Chris, speaking more about the experience of Premise. And then we'd like to welcome David to discuss the tool and the practical experiences of Balcony. And we are delighted to also have with us Andrew, who will be able to speak to some of those applications of Balcony, as well as many other tools in crisis settings. And we will wrap up with some global thoughts from Brent on how to best leverage AI to enable more impactful initiatives. So thank you all very much for joining. I am beyond thrilled to count on all of your interventions here, and over to you, Lance.
Great, thank you, David. I appreciate that. And so knowing that the panel today is about incorporating emerging technologies, I actually did want to talk a little bit about some of NetHope's recent work in AI and some of the things that we're doing in that space. I know that that's certainly a top of mind topic for everyone. We have woken up here early in 2023 to find ourselves sort of in the middle of a new revolution of sorts with the introduction of ChatGPT at the end of last year, and we don't yet have really robust or effective or consistent frameworks across how we're going to use those technologies, and it's also the case that policymakers are really struggling with this. There's great potential for social harm in multiple contexts around how we're going to manage for these things. And so at NetHope, what we like to do in part is to start with people. And I'm just going to share with you a couple of slides here as well from our. This is an AI ethics for nonprofits workshop that we developed a couple of years back. I'm going to actually pop this into this mode because I'm not going to give you the whole presentation, but this is an ethics workshop for nonprofits that was developed by NetHope, USAID, Plan International, the MIT D-Lab. And again, starting from the premise that if you're going to use a new technology, you have to be really grounded in a strong human user-driven need, that there are some things that cannot really yet anyway be outsourced to technology. You really need to kind of ground this in the people using it, in the way in which that it's being used. And so What we've developed in that regard is a bit of an AI ethics primer, and this is a training that we've done in various parts of the world, and with some of the programs that we've done as well. We've done some direct AI programming around chatbots through our Africa chapter, and looking at some of the other activities that are going on with our member organizations. AI is really one of those things that can help us do our work much better and faster. The challenge is really making sure that it's designed responsibly, and while we're minimizing risks and actually, protecting human rights. And we like to use the Alan Turing Institute definition here around AI ethics. It's really values, principles, and techniques, employing widely accepted standards of right and wrong to guide moral conduct in the development and use of AI technologies. Now, recognizing that standards of right and wrong are certainly a subject to themselves, some cultural relativism, depending on where you operate, but it's at least a starting framework, with the idea, again, that NetHope as a learning community, we're continuing to sort of build and to evolve as we go. The ethical AI systems that we're want to see, or we hope that organizations like NetHope members will build, are the ones that really support collective well-being, as well as enhance the ability to tackle challenges that we have around the world. There are also some definitions in this that we use around responsible innovation, and some values that are embedded there: transparent, interactive, sustainable, proactive evaluations for the design and use of technology, so that it's evaluated, so that it's in line with their missions. And again, some of the ethical issues here are no surprise to people here. You can see weaponization of technologies like AI to drive hate speech, misinformation. These are things that where NetHope members are really trying to avoid harm to society. That's the environment in which technology is used. You're trying to avoid harm through countering some of these things. Surveillance, as we know, can be misused. And certainly we've all heard a lot about how bias, especially in large machine learning models, can be embedded in ways that can actually run counter to the goals of the programs that you're running. And of course, we'll talk about systematic bias, systematic fairness, so that we can try to embed those better and more effectively. And where we end up is, kind of trying to get people to start with the right questions. How do you actually kind of, in terms of adopting AI or machine learning models in your organization, you really sort of have to start from the premise is how might design and implementation cause harm? It's helpful to imagine the worst case scenarios as a baseline as you try to build the capacity of your organization to understand and to better manage these new tools. How well do we understand the model that we may be looking at using, how well it's working? Would we know how to recognize bias or inequalities that may be coming out of the outputs before they occur? And so really trying to think that problem through to understand how we might be able to do that. And then what happens when things go wrong? Because in any sort of beta test, things will go wrong. But obviously, if you're taking a look at implementing a new model of some kind, and human lives and human beings are involved, you really want to make sure that you've got some ability to understand what might happen when things go wrong. And so we try to think about some key considerations to try to embed equity, representativeness, and managing for bias into all the work that you do. And so as we spend time, so much of the NetHope work is really about capacity building with organizations to help the people in those organizations develop the processes that they need, and then to use those technologies in ways that are actually going to help the organization get better. This is a very technologically sophisticated audience that probably doesn't need tutelage in this, but as you know, also working in your organizations, many times our organizations are not technologically sophisticated or as sophisticated as they could be or perhaps should be. And so part of what we try to do is to build that bridge between the people who are the passionate practitioners on the ground, in the field, in communities where possible, in those community organizations, as well as in the larger organizations in which many of us work, so that we can make sure that people have a better understanding about how to use these tools, the implications of them, that these can be driven by particular needs that are defined in human terms, and results that are defined in human terms, with an eye to understanding bias, because it's not possible to have an output that's unbiased, because in the sense that no human beings themselves are unbiased. It's just, how do you understand the nature of the bias, and how do you correct for it to have better outcomes and make sure that they're representative. So these are some things that we like to start with, and how we think about capacity building around these new technologies. Others, I'm sure, on this panel are extraordinarily knowledgeable about all the various aspects of this, and I'll look forward to hearing more from them. But David, back to you.
Thank you very much, Lance. And I realized that I was so excited to get started with this panel discussion that I failed to introduce some of our new panelists who have not presented before. So please allow me and join me in giving a warm welcome to David Hamill. He is the CEO and founder of Balcony.io, which is an operations and emergency event management system for a changing world. Balcony.io was designed for modern and proactive organizations addressing the dynamic and the unpredictable. He studied physics at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. I had the pleasure of studying there for a summer, a very long time ago. And he has a master's degree in security and strategic studies from Tel Aviv University. Apart from his leadership of Balcony.io, he was also the co-founder and president of Viozir. Did I pronounce that correctly? Okay, great. So he did that for nearly 5 years. And we are also honored to have with us Dr. Andrew Schroeder. He is the Vice President of Research and Analysis for Direct Relief. He leads its work in GIS mapping, epidemiological analysis, and humanitarian informatics. His work has been published or featured in publications including Science, The Lancet, The New York Times, The Washington Post, Fast Company, Motherboard, Vice, Wired, The New Humanitarian, Pre-Hospital and Disaster Medicine, and the International Journal of Cancer. He has worked in a consulting and advisory capacity for the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, and the World Food Program, WFP. Dr. Schroeder is the co-founder, along with colleagues at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, which I had the honor of working for as well a long time ago, of the COVID-19 Mobility Data Network, a global network of infectious disease experts and public health responders dedicated to real-time digital epidemiological analysis during the COVID-19 pandemic and future health emergencies. He wears several hats, so I greatly encourage you to follow his work and read his publications, which I've been a keen reader of. In addition to what I've mentioned, he's the founder and board president of the global nonprofit WeRobotics.org, which builds local capacity in robotics applications for humanitarian aid, development, and global health in 30 countries worldwide. He earned his PhD in social and cultural analysis from New York University and his master's of public policy and certification in science, technology, and public policy from the Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy at the University of Michigan. Wonderful. So welcome, David Hamill and Andrew Schroeder. Thank you very much for joining us. And given that Lance very suitably used the word premise a handful of times in his intervention. Let's go ahead with Chris Watson, who will speak about the company Premise. Yep. Go ahead, please. Over to you.
Thanks. Yes, I did notice that, Lance, and you'd be surprised how few people decide to kind of make that joke. So, but it works for me. Look, for those of you that were here, I'm going to assume that most people were here for my presentation just a little short while ago, and I don't want to rehash exactly what Premise is, especially in a humanitarian setting. But what I'd hoping to use my time for is talk a little bit about kind of what I have learned about trying to, work with the humanitarian assistance community as somebody that is deployed by a commercial technology company, and in particular, a commercial tech startup, right? Which in many ways puts Premise in a different category from like Google.org or like Meta's Data for Good program, right? Like in particular, at this point in time, I'm not really in a Premise's international development and humanitarian assistance work is not charity, at least not yet, right? And I think, I just have a couple points, but I think they're pretty important because as we look to adopt more and more commercial technologies as part of how we run our programs, these are issues that are going to come up again and again. And it's not just me. So I think first off, to just say, like, Premise's main business is focused on low and middle income countries, but it is not data collection in the humanitarian or long-term development space, right? Like our principal business is market research data collection from stores that are owned by what we call them mom and pops, at least in American English, but they're individual proprietorships that are owned by families. And it's very hard for companies that sell anything, from like the Coca-Cola regional bottlers and distributors through makeup companies. It's very hard for them to understand, how their products are displayed, how they're priced, whether their promotions are executed, that sort of thing, right? So that's how Premise ended up here. But we definitely did not build this for the sort of long-term development or humanitarian assistance communities. What we have appreciated is, and this goes doubly for the humanitarian side of this, is that what you all try to do in terms of data collection pushes our product and our capabilities to the absolute limit because you're working on some of the world's most challenging problems. And there's a broad recognition, including in other parts of Premise, that is useful, right? That this will ultimately force us to build a better product. On top of that, it's something that there are a lot of people at the company really appreciate an opportunity to be involved in, even if it's not their main job. And that in particular is true for like the sort of like software developers and data scientists here who are not like committed to my part of the organization for very much of their day, right? But I have seen what I view as 3 potential challenges that make adoption of these new technologies a challenge in humanitarian assistance, particularly when they're not free. So the first is, I would call it almost a subconscious resistance to finding a product that would solve a problem that is available commercially versus building your own. I don't really know where it comes from, but there's kind of this assumption that very few people would say out loud, but their actions demonstrate to me all the time, that because humanitarian assistance is working on such big problems, and because there, are all of these aspects of what you're doing that make it unique from kind of the commercial world, that there must not be a commercial product that could help. And I think that is not true. And I think that it has become increasingly not true in the realms of the use of satellite imagery and drones and a whole, host of technologies, cloud, right? Well beyond anything that Premise is doing. But that, leads us to this sort of like mode of, buying things or services to solve our problems that starts with, I must write a scope of work. and it must be done as services. And that excludes the sort of search, at least from a procurement perspective, from a commercial product that could help solve a problem. And it gets into what I see as the second issue. And to be honest, I have become convinced that this is the number one issue, and it's procurement, right? Like, from what I have seen, but not just in humanitarian assistance, but in all of sort of global development, that it's very hard for these organizations to buy commercial products unless they are part of some like really long and well-established category of things that you need, like signing a lease, right? Like, nobody writes a scope of work for somebody to go build a house. They rent one and they sign a lease, right? Similarly, no one's building their own computers. They buy computers, but that all happens from their IT team. It doesn't happen from the teams that are, actually users of much more emerging technologies, which are not IT teams anymore. Or if it's something cheap, like pencils, right? And so we get into the situation where, like, I've seen one large UN organization using the exact same paperwork to buy their endpoint monitoring software for their computers as they do to hire consultants. And commercial companies are like totally allergic to that. They cannot justify to their leadership, to their investors, or to the market doing, those types of procurements instead of using their own paperwork. And it makes it very challenging, I've seen, for these technologies to be adopted from a more, mainstream perspective. And then the last one is, I think there is a tendency when there is an emerging technology that seems like there is a strong application in humanitarian assistance, to make a policy for exactly what we should do with it as like the first reaction. And I'm not trying to sort of elbow you on this, Lance, given that you did just talk about, policy around ethical use of AI. But when ChatGPT was released, I'm friends with a CEO of a large NGO that is focused on long-term development. I won't name who. And he called me and he said, "Chris, do you know a consulting firm I can hire to tell my organization how to use ChatGPT?" And like, that's the idea, is like, we'll bring in somebody, they'll come up with a plan and a framework. And I'm like, why don't you just tell your staff to play with it? And then start to figure out, they'll come up with the applications and then start to build policy around it. So, I think, especially because most of our donors tend to be these very large bureaucracies that operate on a very policy-driven perspective, there's a tendency to take that approach and apply it to how we adopt emerging technologies, when really I think it should be the other way around. So I'll stop there and look forward to being part of the comments.
Thank you very much, Chris. We had a question from before, actually, during Lance's presentation, and I'd like to extend that question now, while I also make a question to you, Chris, regarding premise. So I'll start with premise. How do you see the challenges and the opportunities of a tool such as Premise to collect data from remote, rural, or resource-deprived areas? And to what extent is that simply beyond the operational feasibility or beyond the business model of a company such as Premise? And then that will take me smoothly to the question for Lance and others. Over to you, Chris.
Yeah, thanks. I think that okay, one of the challenges is when I look at our commercial business, right? And we have a lot of data collection in sub-Saharan Africa, but like, if you want to know what does Coca-Cola's Nigerian bottler and distributor care about, they care about the parts of Nigeria that make up the majority of the country's GDP, right? So yes, it's still in Nigeria, but they care about Lagos. And so first thing I have to do is I have to convince the company that it makes sense to build a larger network in Borno and Yobe and Adamawa when our commercial customers care about, Lagos, Ibadan, and Benin City. But generally speaking, the reason I think that we have decided this does make sense is because, like, ultimately, a lot of the work to launch a network in Nigeria applies regardless of where you are, right? So we have been able to overcome that some, but it's not always going to be the case. And in particular, I think the lowest income countries where it is hardest to get commercial customers to is where, yeah, I have to have some I have to do a lot of internal sales, right? To convince people that this makes sense to do. And then I think, the second big question is around, I think, internet access in particular. And I think the good news is, I can say, so I've never seen anybody do a super comprehensive study, but from what I have seen, mobile network connections in rural areas have mostly been rolled out in a way that mirrors the major road infrastructure. And so what you end up seeing is market towns that have mobile connections, right? Not everybody lives in range of that, but they might visit that, market town 1 or 2 days a week. And so it starts to become possible to reach people in those areas, but not always. And then, of course, if it's a country where the government has the power to turn the internet off when it suits them, that breaks everything, and there's nothing I can do about that. So yeah, no premise in Tigray still, not really.
I'm very glad that you addressed the particular case of Nigeria, because that is what the next question was about. I think you partly answered it, Chris, but I may extend it to the rest of the panel at this time in case somebody wants to touch on this, or it's also an issue to continue considering as we advance our conversation. One of our participants in the audience highlighted the importance of sustainable development, saying that it cannot be overemphasized, and also highlighted the challenges of limited connectivity and digital knowledge in a country like Nigeria, and how to best engage with grassroots communities in such contexts. In my previous role as technical advisor of IMAP in Ethiopia, I frequently witnessed the limits of even a tool such as Premise and many other tech solutions when we were interested in those remote, afflicted, and conflicted areas where there was a limited network. So I'll just open the space if anybody wants to comment on the work that you do and the challenges or opportunities that you see in areas with more limited connectivity or digital knowledge.
I mean, I can answer from a couple different points of view if you'd like. I mean, so as you mentioned before, I wear several different hats, including this one. And from the point of view of We Robotics, we decided that what makes the most sense in terms of things like drones and artificial intelligence, which require internet connectivity of some kind, usually plus digital skills of some kind, is to really focus on identifying local experts. And just because the general population may have challenges, or any individual community, there are lots of local experts that are in those areas which need to be networked and resourced, and there needs to be a long-term plan for at least some kind of local business model that also ties them into the global aid, development, conservation communities, right? So, and to echo Chris's point, in that context, really, there's often a procurement problem for them, where their own governments are often reluctant to hire local experts because they're not sort of international companies, say. And so the more we network, the more we build capacity around them, then the more likely they are to actually have local business models that you can actually grow from. And drones have been a really interesting example, because there are actually a number of really good use cases in agriculture, construction, delivery of goods, et cetera, that are still continuing to grow. And so there's a growing sort of like space around this. I would say, conversely, when I do the work for the Crisis Ready Partnership, which focuses on kind of large scale private data and ways that we can can kind of plug that into, from Meta, Google, et cetera, and plug that into problem solving, often actually, I think it's a public sector counterpart problem. I mean, like you talk about local community, but there's also been a fairly persistent hollowing out of the state in many of these countries, where really what is needed is people that are experts in public health, in emergency management, in agronomy, et cetera, that are able to have long-term careers in the public sector and then have counterparts internationally that can work on introducing novel technologies and novel data sources. And that, I think, has not often been the model of the international aid and development communities, which is why we have these arguments around decolonization of humanitarianism, because you've had too often humanitarian organizations, very large ones that we all know of, who hire away the public sector and privatize the public sector. And then we wonder why the public sector doesn't have capacity to do a lot of these things. So we need to reverse the incentives around here. We need to reverse some of these models so that we put resources where it matters and then have support organizations. I mean, this is why the work at Direct Relief informs everything that I do, because Direct Relief, is only 120 people, but supports thousands of organizations throughout the world in the health sector. And I think that kind of relationship increasingly ought to define how we think about the role that humanitarians and development organizations play. They don't supplant the sector, but act as buttress for that.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I am glad that you raised those points, which highlight that community engagement and localization, which is a closely related concept, have been making a great deal of progress in terms of the discourse and this growing commitment from a lot of international organizations. But there are some structural challenges that have to be carefully examined. And you touched on just a couple of them, but I hope that over the next few days, we will have an inspiring, but also a critical conversation on what needs to change from different aspects in order to make significant progress. So I think those are some very thought-provoking reflections, and thank you very much to Lance and Chris and to Andrew for that intervention. And I think all of that offers an attractive balcony to move forward with the intervention from David Hamill. So over to you, and please excuse the pun.
So thank you very much, David. At least your name I will not forget, I promise. So actually, I maybe I can link what we're doing to just those last statements by Lance, Chris, and Andrew. So Balcony, as you mentioned earlier, David, is the location-aware messaging and management platform. Basically, we are bridging a gap between the tools that sophisticated organizations like the Fortune 50 enterprises, or even modern militaries, are using in order to command and control and manage operations in the physical world, and how the humanitarian public health sector actually manages operations on a daily basis in the physical world. And ironically, when you think of humanitarian emergency response, public health, the challenges there are sometimes 100 times more complex than what an enterprise will have on a daily basis. Yet the tools are either, they range from paper forms and Excel sheets on one hand, all the way to maybe WhatsApp as the most sophisticated tool to command and control and manage and orchestrate those operations. And yet the gap is just phenomenal. And so Balcony is basically designed there. It's a new messaging tool that that, you know, think of what if WhatsApp and Waze, the navigation tool, had a baby, it would be Balcony. It's location aware, it's linked into GIS, into data sources, and basically allows a manager to understand where people are, to understand what messages are coming from, to engage locally. So basically to point at the village and communicate with the health workers at that village right now. And again, there's no WhatsApp group that defines who's at the village right now. There's no WhatsApp group that defines who's at the airport right now, right? The current tools that we're using are not designed for the physical world and dynamic operations. Linking to what you mentioned, what we've seen is that because Balcony is a messaging tool, when you provide it to the people on the ground, and the people on the ground can be the workers, the volunteers, can be the beneficiaries of the actual actions, of the actual evacuations. And maybe Andrew can give some examples of operations that were done on the platform in the past. So anybody who actually has access to a mobile phone, and that is becoming more and more abundant, and hopefully very soon to become totally ubiquitous globally. And definitely the trend is moving there. Many of them might not be literate, and many of them might not feel comfortable in filling up forms, etc. But basically all of them use WhatsApp. They know to record a message, they know to take a picture, they know to record a video. And so by allowing the ability to communicate bidirectionally back and forth between the managers and the people on the ground in real time through that multimedia interface that everybody uses, it actually opens up the availability for people that are not literate and have a limited digital knowledge to still be a part of what we would call, in Balcony, we would call it a situational network, right? So we'll deploy that. We'll provide the capability to, and Balcony, a little bit like Premise and NetHope, is a B2B approach. We will provide the platform to an organization like IMAP so they can provide it to their beneficiaries on the ground. Anyone then on that situational network, on one hand, can be engaged with very accurate information. And again, very accurate information, meaning just in time, when you walk into that village and you get that message, or you get that request for information, and you're engaged very accurately with no need to go and sift through resources or use AI to figure out those huge amounts of data in order to take action, right? The whole notion is that you are exactly like on Waze. You get the message when it's relevant for you, so you can hit the brake if you need to take action, right? So this is one thing. The other thing is every person now becomes a walking sensor for the organization, because everyone has a phone. And so if I want to integrate with resources like alerting tools or GIS tools, and now point at that polygon that was analyzed and defined that this is the area that's going to be flooded. And I want to communicate with the people there and ask them, how deep is the water, right? Is it 2 centimeters, 20 centimeters, or 2 meters, right? I did do the planning, I do the analysis. I mean, those two other tools have done that phenomenally well. But now communicate and ground truth the situation, understand what's going on. That's a capability that Balcony provides in order actually to increase the efficiency also to the decision makers, who many of them might not be professional experts in management. They just happen to sit on a tool and now take action. And again, maybe Andrew can mention that as well. Thank you for the opportunity to just talk a few minutes about Balcony. But I think that we can definitely be force multipliers to both what Premise does, what NetHope does, clearly what Direct Relief does. The idea is that today everyone has a phone, and if they don't have a phone today, they will have it in the next few years. And it's a phenomenal network that is still underused significantly with the current tools.
Thank you very much, David, for that quick overview on Balcony.io and your reflections on how to best deploy it in humanitarian situations. With that, I think we will have a very good transition to Andrew. Andrew, based on your 3 complementary roles within Crisis Ready, Direct Relief, and We Robotics, could you please share your thoughts on how to
Sure.
best explore, integrate, and extract value from different tech solutions, including Balcony and beyond? Thank you very much, and over to you.
Absolutely, no problem. And I think I have like the weird distinction of like having some relationship to everyone on this panel. We're a member of NetHope. I've done projects with Premise, close collaborator with Balcony, and Brent and I work on various things. So I can probably speak to everything. But I actually wanted to just like kind of highlight Premise and Balcony on 2 like aha moments that I've had in technology for social good over the last several years. In the case of Premise, because it's shorter, you know, I think Chris mentioned this in his presentation, but you know, when the Russian invasion of Ukraine happened, you know, we at Direct Relief were in the position of needing to quickly scale medical support across the country and to understand sort of, you know, what is needed, where is it needed, particularly for pharmaceuticals. So not everything, but for this specific commodity. And it's of course quite challenging to go and do this kind of data collection. I mean, like we don't, Direct Relief is, I mentioned 120 people. We don't really have a network on the ground. And in the case of the war, you know, like it's not safe to send people, you know, ourselves out into a number of places where, you know, we need to collect information. So the model of Premise is the idea that there are people already there that are able, if you connect them right, to go in and find information that's needed. So people that are proximate to pharmacies that go in and have a defined task, collect that data in a very structured way, aggregate it, and then over a very short period of time, I mean, I'm talking like weeks, gain a level of insight into the pharmaceutical distribution market, commercial pharmaceutical distribution market in the middle of the war that we just literally could not have imagined getting any other way. And the key there is you didn't have to actually boot up a new network. The network is already there. You just have to know what it's for and how to be able to activate it. And I think that's actually in many ways the core insight of Balcony. So like I had been working with David, I met David actually at Facebook F8, the last one they ever held in person. And we were talking about ways to sort of scale crowdsourcing information or, you know, command and control networks for local healthcare partners in disasters. And you know, had an experiment in the Philippines where, you know, it was you know, challenging to kind of extend services out to everyone. What when the, again, another war, when Kabul fell to the Taliban, we had been in dialogue with groups of people that were in Kabul at the time that needed to get out of Kabul. So one group through the Girls Robotics team and the other through Asian University for Women, which had students based there. And very chaotic situation and the high need for command and control. So the demand for a strong technology solution is very clear, but how do you do that? How do you like train a bunch of students to, in the middle of a war to, you know, figure out how to use a new technology and then coordinate them to safely exit the country? It turns out that if you just simply, you know, there's a, you know, everyone was using WhatsApp. There was already a WhatsApp group for everyone. Extend the Balcony tools out probably within, I don't know, maybe a half an hour. We were able to get all of like close to 200 people booted up on Balcony and gained visibility into the network. And all of a sudden you went from total chaos into like, oh, that's actually a fairly clear command and control situation. Like that now we can actually see where you are, organize where you are, provide instructions, and minimal training, almost no training. And again, this is the idea that like the simplest solution for what you need is often the best one, right? That you don't need, to be able to run a bunch of AI algorithms to extrapolate where their positions are and what the best route would be. You need to find them and use the networks that are in place to add capacity to them. So the capacity we added was the ability to have bidirectional control, the ability to see them on a map, the ability to push information to their phones so that they could see multimedia information, maps, directions, etc. And then that was able to then generate a network where previously none had been. And it's not something that needs to be sustained, actually. It's for a purpose. It's to get out of Kabul and to then, it disperses after that. This was then flexible enough that we've actually turned around and put it to work in places like Bangladesh and Cox's Bazar, helping to coordinate emergency maternal referral. So it turns out it's a very, although the sustainability question is maybe a little higher, given that people have to, continue to deploy a core kind of medical coordination technology, but it's not that different actually. It's a referring women for surgery when they have complex pregnancies is a coordination problem. And so being able to put a coordination layer on top of an existing functional network. So we work with local healthcare providers to do that and just add this coordination layer on top of it. And I think that this is what it has applications literally up and down the humanitarian system, is to add these layers of intelligence, layers of coordination into the kinds of activities that we're already doing. And then that is what you build intelligence on top of. Once you've actually got that functioning, AI becomes much more sensible in terms of how you would apply it. Because it becomes a very clear use case rather than trying to like figure out in general what AI is for, which is, I have no idea how to do that. But I do know about how to be able to direct people towards, I need to do this and let's find the best tools for the job. And so I think, we could, carry on with various places like this, but making sure that you build those on top of what exists, use flexible, relatively straightforward solutions, and messaging really has been the core of those kind of points.
Thank you very much, Andrew. There are a lot of very interesting insights there on how different types of organizations can leverage tech solutions to enhance their operational reach and capacity and have greater analytical power. And ultimately to further and better engage with local communities, be they local healthcare providers and other key actors on the ground. So thank you very much. Just as a logistical note, we do have a bit of flexibility, so I hope that some of you are able to stay on for some extra minutes. We're scheduled to wrap up this discussion in just 10 minutes, but we do have the accompaniment of our fellow interpreters until 12:30 Colombia time. So we could extend this conversation for 10 more minutes if that is convenient for you. Good. If somebody needs to part early, that is perfectly understood. I hope Brent doesn't have to part because it is his space now, and we do have a series of questions even before you launch your talking points or presentation. Allow me, Brent, to share some of these thoughts because I think they may inform your intervention quite well. Some of the questions that we've had over the last couple of hours include things like, what are some of the limitations of AI in humanitarian contexts, and particularly how well does it adapt to different languages, including to ethnic dialects? Another question, let me just throw these ideas so they can enrich or complexify your intervention. Another one is, considering the rapid advancements in AI, how can local level organizations best harness their power to improve the efficiency, decision-making, and community engagement while addressing potential ethical concerns and ensuring inclusivity? I know these questions are quite broad and they may be challenging to address, but I think it's good to just have the pulse of our audience and know what they're reflecting on to see how much we can address these issues. And finally, somebody wrote, and let me just read directly here, quote, "I am interested in understanding how to encourage people in affected communities to make use directly of AI in their respective communities. What types of training facilitate adoption? Is there any example of how this can improve resilience or result in anticipatory action?" So Brent, feel free to touch on some of these as you feel most comfortable. And I think these are also food for thought for our other panelists to jump in afterwards. So thank you very much once again for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you so much. Those are some great questions. So I mentioned that I produced the Humanitarian AI Today podcast series, and we have an opportunity to speak to some amazing guests, working on artificial machine learning models, for example, from Google and other companies. And one thing everybody stresses is how fast AI is advancing. And you think of like a humanitarian product development and deployment cycle, and it might be a year or two, for example, from development to launch to get feedback loop and things like that. And, think of a time frame of a year or two, and now shrink it to a week to 2 weeks. And within that span of time, whatever we're working on might be irrelevant in the span of a month. And they really try to drive this home. And we need to start thinking about AI, the capacity, the ability to do amazing things is just growing exponentially fast, the development. And so it's actually hard to pin down anything, but it's important for us all to get involved and to collaborate and kind of get outside of our comfort zones and our business models and business plans to really think about how can we collaborate around trying new things, as Chris mentioned earlier, to start playing with it. And, some of these questions you talk about the power of AI and how do you deploy it? And, this is a work in progress. And so these are great questions, but they're almost irrelevant in a sense, because right now this is growing fast and we have an opportunity to participate. And part of that participation, from my perspective, involves channeling data through open data sharing frameworks that AIs can pick up, that we can actually use to test models and test capabilities and try things out. So for a lot of local level organizations, it's really, really important that you start sharing information through open data sharing frameworks like the International Aid Transparency Initiative. And the second thing is to really open yourself up to partnering with other organizations around AI. And for example, us and some other organizations are working on a partnership for generative AI. And really all it's about is just sharing models, machine learning models and starter code, and just directly communicate with one another about what you're working on and, try to help each other out. And, this is really important right now. So I think I just want to preface things around this, the importance of this. And maybe we can open it up a little bit, but those are great questions, but it's really hard to answer them because this is a work in progress right now.
Thank you very much. Yeah, go ahead.
One quick thing, back to an earlier question, there's a lot of work around on-device machine learning. And so you have a mobile phone, a simple mobile phone in a developing environment, but the power of that phone is growing exponentially as well. So you can run some of these sophisticated models on the device without needing the internet per se. So, this is improving as well, that the hardware side and the software side.
And
Thank you very much, Brent. Yes, I just wanted to open up the floor for those who have any reflections on some of these questions and also on the perspectives that you have heard so far from your fellow panelists. So go ahead, David, please.
Just one quick thought following Brent's comments. One of the challenges that we've seen with several of our customers and partners is that AI in general, IoT, any type of all those new sources of very valuable data can generate a lot of insight, and yet the gap is often okay, I know that this is happening and I'm pretty confident about it. Now what? Right. And so one of the things that we did recently, and it's not public yet, but I can share here on this panel, is that we're opening as part of our open architecture, we're opening an API and integrating now with multiple APIs to make AI actionable. Right. So we are not an AI company. We don't do AI. But once AI comes through any type of service comes into an outcome or an alert or an insight that has value, we answer the okay, now what? We make it actionable. So if it's an area that is going to be flooded, like we mentioned, or if it's for example, we've reached to over 1,000 people in Mexico City during an earthquake there, asking them for the scope of damage, and now getting hundreds of answers that are location aware, and using analytics, immediately building insights to where resources need to be allocated, because then we see immediately on the map where damage is, where people need help, just by reaching out to the people on balcony and getting back that information and embedding AI and analytics to help decision making. So those are the kind of places where we can help. And we do have a project now ongoing with NVIDIA to also deploy that kind of capability to make AI actionable. Again, that's exactly where we try to force multiply all those sources that keep updating and keep growing, and AI is just exploding right now. So just make it actionable. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you very much, David. And yes, just in an organic way, please.
I'd like to echo Brent's call for participation in this, honestly. I think this is one of the, I think Lance started off by talking about how we all sort of woke up in December and suddenly there was ChatGPT and you could use AI in a way that you actually couldn't do it before, even though it's not new. I mean, this has been in development for quite some time. But the ability to participate in this now is, I think, a responsibility that we have as people kind of working on the problems that we're working on with the communities that we're working on, and to participate according to at least some of the guidelines that Lance was highlighting earlier around need to be aware of representativeness, bias, et cetera, the way that large language models tend to produce some really incredibly valuable information and some nonsense information. And this is in a mission critical way can be as much of a problem as it is a gain. And you see these models proliferating everywhere. So ChatGPT was a brilliant business move in the sense of, getting there first makes all the difference. But there are now something like 50 to 100 new models being introduced weekly at this point. So, I mean, some of them do completely different things. I mean, I think one of the most exciting was Meta's segment anything model, which allows for rapid, unsupervised identification of features within images. This is a problem that we've had in terms of the application of drone technology in humanitarian response since drone technology has existed. That this is one of the reasons why still to this day you have people not making maps. Even when they use drones, they don't make maps often in disaster response because extracting information is too hard. But now you can actually, through the large language model that Meta just released and others, it's possible to extract features almost instantaneously and produce information that's useful and that could be used for zonal statistics and damage assessment and other kinds of things. That kind of specific application of large language models becomes, I think, really exciting because it then potentially turbocharges something that was a blocker for us for a long time, in the ability to actually make use of aerial data collected during disaster response. So there's a million other examples like this, but you have to participate to make it work.
Let's just take a couple of further minutes. I believe at this time, a lot of the questions that we have are quite interesting, but they circle around themes that we've already touched on. So I just want to open the space up in case any one of you have any comments for each other or any parting words before we close our panel.
I've got to drop off in a second, but I just wanted to mention David, his point. And, you know, I come from San Francisco, the Bay Area, and with a lot of tech companies. And when you train AI models, there's a like training and validation and testing, and there's a whole process. And you really need to think about the data. And part of that is thinking about the questions that you want to ask the data. So I push really hard on, you know, advocating data sharing and data publishing, but we also need to be aggregating questions that we want to ask the data, and we need to start aggregating, you know, responses and response variations that we'd love to, how you'd want these models to answer these questions. And then we need to start iterating through the data, the questioning, the testing, the outputs, and this is something that we can all participate in. And you know, I just wanted to emphasize that. And thanks again for having me on the panel. And we should do this every day. The development cycle of AI, you know, that's how fast things are moving. And, you know, we need to keep pace.
Thank you very much, Brent. Lance had to take off a moment ago as well. Any final comments or parting words from other panelists?
We're all Googling segment anything and looking at it now, thanks to Andrew.
It's awesome. You got to go do
cool.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I put it in ChatGPT, but I don't know if it was trained recently enough to search, so I have to still Google it.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you very much to all of you. I think this panel has met and exceeded my expectations, which were already quite high. So thank you, Chris, Brent, Lance, Andrew, and David for contributing to this conversation on how to best explore, integrate, and extract value from technology in complex, remote, hard to access, resource constrained environments, and how to help transform the humanitarian development and conservation and peace building and other areas for good. And I think that learning process between the tech sector and the international organizations that Lance mentioned is crucial, and all of you in some way or another are working towards that. So thank you very much. And with that, we formally close our panel discussion, and we will begin the closing of the event. I'd like to make some closing comments and then pass it on to Jeffrey Villaveses. So apart from thanking each one of the panelists in this session, I'd like to also recognize the interventions of each presenter so far today. We had a very rich discussion on community engagement delivered by Rania Elesawi of UNICEF that helped us better understand the concept of community engagement and how it is being defined, as well as the various tools such as minimum standards, common monitoring evaluation framework, and trainings, and many other tools that would help us better understand and realize community engagement. And she will be participating in a panel discussion tomorrow, which I trust will give us an even deeper understanding of how that community engagement can be realized. Then we had the intervention from Brent Phillips, which looked at the advances in technology and different tools from the early days of AOL to ChatGPT today as one of the greatest technological advances available to the general public. Considering that AI feeds on the information available on the internet, it's important that we learn to publish and make information available in an accessible format for AI, so that we can have a greater understanding and dominion of the narrative and reduce information bias. Then we had an intervention by Chris Watson of Premise, which helped us deepen our understanding of this tool for remote data collection from such a large and growing network of contributors worldwide. It was useful to learn about the way that Premise is helping to make data collection less costly and efficient for many organizations. It was interesting afterwards to hear the experience of Andrew Schroeder using it in Ukraine and other environments. So it's important to realize how such tools are helping to enhance the capacity of many international organizations, as well as to recognize the unique differences with the traditional modes of data collection of many international organizations, and to collaborate well between tech firms like Premise and international organizations in order to learn from each other and ensure that we extract the most value from these tools, overcoming some of the limitations, or simply understanding that these tools simply have to work differently, but also truly extracting the most value to have much greater international reach way beyond the presence of country offices or staff and so on. Finally, we had the intervention from Lance Pierce, CEO of NetHope, who highlighted the partnerships that are being established and strengthened between tech firms starting out in Silicon Valley in the US and beyond, with such a large group of mid and large companies that are collaborating more seamlessly with international organizations in order to increase the social impact, to enhance digital transformations, and to ensure that communities can increasingly be at the center and leading feet of interventions. Lance highlighted how there are more people with digital needs, capacity building, and access to the internet as high priority issues. NetHope has found that the most concerning issues for organizations that they work with are information certainty, digital skills, technology application, maximum performance, and digital protection and connectivity. I hope that this summary is useful to all of us. It's a refresher in case some persons could not join us from the start. And with that, I want to hand it over to Jeffrey Villaveses, the country director of IMAP in Colombia. Thank you very much, and over to you, Jeffrey.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you to all the panelists and attendees today. You've given great contributions to the discussion around community engagement and technology and innovation. We hope to continue exploring these different ideas the next 2 days. Tomorrow we'll have an additional line of speakers and presenters. Lance Pierce from NetHope will be with us again, opening tomorrow. And then we'll have presentations by Kuja, Mawingu, IMAP in Ukraine, and local organization Corporación Misión Rural. Finally, we'll have a panel which will include the Canadian Red Cross, the Firelight Group, Rania from UNICEF will once again be with us, and an independent expert as well, Fernando Brunhart. So thank you for having been with us. We look forward to having you again tomorrow. Please invite other colleagues you may have if you found this to be a productive space, an interesting space. For me, it certainly has been, and I hope we can put to practice the different ideas that have been shared with us today. Thank you very much. You have a good afternoon or evening as it may be.